Welcome to Conversations with a Wounded Healer. I'm your host, Sarah Bueno. I'm a psychotherapist, teacher, consultant, and most importantly, a wounded healer, living and working in Skokie, Illinois, just outside of Chicago. This is a space for thought-provoking, unscripted conversations with people from all walks of life, united by the shared mission of healing ourselves while promoting healing in the world around us. Whether you're here to find inspiration, learn, or simply feel seen, you're invited on this journey of healing from the individual to the collective. Thanks for joining me. Hello, friends. Welcome to the video version of Conversations with a Wounded Healer. Whew. The sun is shining in Skokie, Illinois today, which makes me feel just a little better. But I did want to acknowledge the current insanity in the world and also let you know why you might not be hearing me talk about it quite as timely on the podcast. Because I am now an organized person. I schedule out these recordings, record these intros pretty far in advance. And so by the time this hits your ears from the time it hits me, time travel is possible. It's not going to a million other things, excuse me, a million other things are going to have happened. And so it just doesn't, in order to be timely, make more sense, I just want to try to be as vague about the chaos in the world. But just know that I'm there with you. It is a really hard time to be alive right now, I think, for everybody who's existing, whether they know it or not, I think. So I am in it with you. I am just as overwhelmed and stressed and frustrated and I was going to say helpless. I'm not helpless. I do have fear, but I don't live in that fear. Sometimes I do, but not most of the time. I'm ready for a revolution and I am ready to figure out what that's going to look like. But right now, I sure don't know. But speaking of the revolution, Steve Duke is who we're interviewing today. And I learned, thanks to the people who participated in our 7-year anniversary survey, that y'all are interested in macro topics too, not just the individual one-on-one healing stuff. And so Steve is a really great person to talk to about this macro jazz. So Steve works in the venture capital world with mental health. He looks at trends. He is analyzing what's going on in the business sector in regards to mental health because he really wants to make the world better for a lot of people. So that's what we talk about today. And he asks me a lot of questions about what I see that gives me concern. And I'll just let you in on a little secret. I am judgmental. If you've listened to this for any period of time, you probably already know that. And I'm trying to take more accountability for when the judgment comes up. And I got to tell you that within this conversation, I was really cringing at how judgmental I felt like I was being about therapists. So I just want to let you know, when that comes up, I have realized that usually means that I am feeling overburdened by what's happening in the world. And I am pressuring myself to single-handedly do something about that. So I think I was just in a particularly crusty mood when we did this conversation. So if you hear it and you're like, Sarah, whoa, that's a lot. I know. And I'm trying to take ownership of it. Another thing we get into in here is the way that AI impacts human connection. And he mentions a couple of AI companions. Yeah, you're on video, so you can see my quotes, AI companions. And I'm not going to tell you exactly what happens because you'll have to listen to the episode. But in the conversation, I said, I'm going to try one out and do the same thing he did. And I did. And I experienced the same very concerning problem. So I'll just share that all with you up front. And if you want to try it yourself, go for it, because I'm guessing the same thing is going to happen. So anyway, we are going to have to figure out how we cope, how we adapt, how we evolve with the reality of the fact that artificial intelligence is here. The singularity is upon us. We are going to have to begin to figure out how to live with this and adapt to how it's changing our society, and that therefore changing therapy. So there's a lot that we get into today. I hope you really enjoy it. So without further ado, Steve Duke is the founder of the Hemingway Group, dedicated to improving population mental health. With experience at McKinsey and 2 unicorn startups, he helps leaders scale mental health innovations. Drawing from his own journey of overcoming OCD, he created the Hemingway Report to provide insights, inspiration, and community for those driving change in mental health care. So please enjoy my conversation with Steve Duke. Steve Duke, welcome to Conversations with a Wounded Healer.
Thanks, Sarah. How are you?
I had a busy day today, and I have a thing after this too. So I'm a little like, eh. People can't see me right now, but eh.
Okay. Yeah, I feel that.
How are you? You're starting your day in Australia.
Yeah, I'm pretty good. Body's a little tired, but like good tired. So yeah, I'm great.
Excellent. Well, as I just told you before we started recording, but I want to let listeners in on our little secret today. So, this is going to be a little bit different than a lot of the interviews that we've done. You are not a therapist. You do not consider yourself a healer, though we can debate that later. Um, but therapists are freaking the fuck out right now because I think we're at a tipping point of evolution in the field in many different areas, but especially as it comes to like venture capital and technology and how all of this stuff is getting incorporated into the mental health sphere. A lot of people are afraid AI chatbots are going to take their job. You know, venture capital is going to put all of us small business owners out of business, all this kind of shit. So, you are the person, no pressure, but it seems like you're the person who's got a lot of information about this. And I just wanted an opportunity to pick your brain and have everybody hear it.
Yeah, 100%. I'm actually so keen to have this conversation. Like we were saying before we started, I've got so many questions for you as well. So
Great.
I think it should be a good chat. I'm pretty keen.
Yeah. So, well, do you want to like do a little intro to people so they know who you are and what you do and can sign up for your newsletter?
Yeah, 100%. So, yeah, I'm Steve Duke. I run a company called the Hemingway Group. And so we work with mental health organizations, primarily on like the business side of like what they try and do. So oftentimes that's like nonprofits or larger clinics. Oftentimes it's like private businesses as well. But you know, as you said, like I'm not a clinician, I don't practice as a therapist, but my background is more on the business side of things. So trying looking after like the commercial element so that these businesses or the practices can be like sustainable. Um, and so, yeah, I then one of the things I do is like write a weekly newsletter called the Hemingway Report, which is basically kind of like analyzing what's happening in the industry, what's happening kind of from a mental health innovation perspective. Like my North Star is trying to improve population mental health. And the way that the role that I can see myself playing in that is more on the well, what's happening from an innovation perspective? How do we make sure that reaches clients in like a thoughtful, safe, evidence-based way, and then that the organizations that actually are doing the right things are able to scale and able to kind of reach more patients.
Yeah. Let's start there because I was reading the newsletter. I don't know if you sent it out today or yesterday, but it was an interview with a VC company in the UK that's trying to like partner with NHS, or I guess they're trying to help people, you know, work with NHS, the National Health Service. So the first thing I thought when I read that is it's great to help patients, but therapists' mental health is struggling right now. And that's the whole reason, part of why this podcast is in existence is my desire for therapists to do their work. And I have noticed post COVID, therapists have not recovered. Therapists are more burnt out than ever before. Therapists are feeling more hopeless than ever before. Like we said, the field is changing right now. And so that brings up a lot of fear. And not that venture capital is 100% bad. I don't think anything is 100% bad or 100% good. But how do we help the therapists right now before not yes, before we help the patients? Because if the therapists are
Mm.
fucked up, the patients aren't going to fare very well. Like truthfully, right?
Yeah, 100%. So I actually did a bunch of research on this about a year ago. where I was like talking to a bunch of therapists and like surveying them and trying to understand this. And I found the exact same trends that like are probably very obvious to you just from like being a therapist and being in the community. But I actually want to know from your perspective, what do you see as causing these kind of levels of burnout and distress? Because I see the same thing. I'm
Yeah.
concerned about the same thing, but I kind of want to understand probably more about like what are the root causes of it.
Yeah. Um, well, I think like the easiest thing to point to post COVID is therapists didn't get a break when COVID started. In fact, we worked harder than a lot of people who, no offense, but some people were like, oh yeah, I was making bread and I was working out, and like we were
Yeah.
working our fucking asses off.
Yeah.
So there's that, and then this goes into the therapist psyche, because it was like referrals were coming out of the woodwork, people are opening new practices, there's more group practices springing up, and then when the referrals went back down to normal, instead of people going, oh okay, I can rest and take a break now, everybody's like, what the fuck, where are the referrals, oh my god, and they just start freaking out. Then the election, as you probably understand very well, like therapists in general are not very happy about Donald Trump being elected. So that whole thing was a fucking disaster. And we're all worried about, whatever happens in like Medicare, Medicaid ends up usually like being mirrored in regular insurance. And so we're worried now about telehealth being cut and,
Hmm.
all those sorts of things. So there's that for therapists. I also just feel like we're at a very like kinetic fraught time in history, and therapists are just not immune to what is happening in the larger world. Clients are more demanding right now than they ever have been
I've heard
before.
that a lot. Yeah.
Right. And the TikTokification of mental
Yes, I've
health
also
is a
heard that.
challenge, right? My personal view is that I don't know that therapists are getting good enough therapy. I am So I've talked on the podcast before. God bless you if you're a CBT therapist, but I don't believe personally that that's going to get us where we need to go. Um, I think all therapists, whether they believe me or not, I think all therapists have a trauma history. I don't know that all of us have addressed our trauma work. Um, and I that's what I see a like we are a people who already have a lower level of capacity for mental health, like we're more likely to have mental health issues. That's why we go into the field in the first place. And so I think we are um, not uniquely vulnerable, but as a collective, we're uniquely vulnerable. Like, instead of what 10% of the population has a mental health issue, I would guess like 60% of therapists do. Um,
Really?
I would guess. I mean, I'm sure
Yeah.
there's research out there somewhere, but that would be my guess. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know anyone who doesn't have at least an anxiety disorder or depression, let alone, a significant trauma history or bipolar or addiction, right? There's all these things. And so I think all of that combined kind of creates a shit show. And Steve, if I could get you in on these therapist Facebook groups, you would be astounded. You'd be
Yeah.
astounded. Yeah. Oh,
Why?
and one other thing, I guess, about all of this is like I know that times in history after pandemics or like really big natural disasters, there tends to be like an uptick in distrust for institutions.
Mhm.
That's happening at the educational level for therapists too. So as therapists are going through grad school, I was just talking about this with people today that I did the training for. When I was in grad school, all of the people who are my professors and my supervisors, I had the assumption that they had more knowledge than I did. Now that's not the case. Now students come in and they believe that they need to challenge the system.
Yeah.
And while we need to do that on some level, absolutely, there's a lot of throwing out the baby with the bathwater and people not relying on the wisdom that's already been created in the field. So all of those things is what I would
Yeah.
say is
Yeah. There's quite a
contributing.
lot, isn't it?
Right, isn't
Yeah.
it? Yeah.
Yeah, it is a ton. It is a ton. And I think like maybe the piece that you missed, and I'm interested to see if this resonates with you, but what I've seen is like the increasing like financial pressure on therapists.
That too. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think there's like a lot of people who are, this is their livelihood, right? And I think that's where some of the criticism around some of the larger like technology platforms is actually pretty justified, right?
Right.
Because you can see what they're paying for
Mm-hmm.
therapists. Um, and then yeah, we can get into that a lot because I actually have a lot of kind of thoughts
Yeah.
around how that might develop and why that's happening, if that's interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah. Let's do it.
Yeah, so um you talked about kind of like referrals, right? And so the way I think about it is like obviously referrals are kind of like the source of business for any therapist, right? So you have to have clients coming in the door. That's how you pay the bills. Um, and most of them, you probably got them referrals through like friends or from people in the community or people know
Mm-hmm.
you, and then they're like, or they had a friend who went to see you, and they're like, oh, she's great, like you should totally like go and see her. But then I think what's happened was we had a couple of very large companies who got um, significant amount of funding to provide therapy platforms. So like the Talkspaces and the BetterHelps of the world.
Oh,
And
yeah.
what they did was they put a lot of that money into marketing. And so, I mean, I'm sure you see their ads. I see their ads all the freaking time.
As evidenced by every fucking podcast I listen to that I like
Right?
scream at every time I hear the ad. Yes.
Exactly. And so what they've done, I think, is they've kind of like sequestered off like some of the pipeline of referrals. So now you've got the same person who they're like, oh, maybe I should go see a therapist. Rather than asking their friend, they're like, oh, like I've heard of this thing called, BetterHelp. Why don't I just do that? Like it seems, because they've seen like 100 freaking million ads already.
Right.
And so if these platforms own the pipeline of referrals, then
Yep.
the therapist's choice gets limited. And
Right.
so rather than being able to have their own private practice or whatever they want to do, they now kind of have to go and work for these platforms, despite the fact that the compensation is lower because they don't have the source of referrals. And so I think I don't have the data on like what percentage of total referrals that come through these. I still think it's like a small amount just because like in the total ecosystem, like there's so many people going through this, and there's still like relatively smaller players in the broader scheme of things.
Mm.
But I think that's kind of one of the reasons that it's kind of causing a bit of disruption in the industry. Because my question is always like, when I see the rates that some of these platforms are charging, I see the conditions that they're demanding from some of the therapists. My question is, well, why does the therapist go and work for them?
Right.
It's so bad. Like why? Like you know what I mean? Why would you do it? But then I think the fair criticism is, well, if it's the only place that I'm going to get clients, especially if you're a more junior therapist, then I have like quite a lot of empathy for that situation.
Yeah, and again it kind of goes back to the fear. I think therapists to start your own practice, like in truth, is the easiest fucking thing in the world, but a lot of times people are just scared. They're really scared. Like I'm doing a start your private practice seminar in a couple weeks, and most of the time like it's taken years for people to like work up the nerve to believe that they can work for themselves. Again, we go back to trauma history, right? If I'm a trauma survivor, I likely have troubles with self-esteem or self-worth and trusting myself and all this sort of stuff. So I think there's a perceived safety in working for a company, but as I understand it, most of those are having you be a 1099 and not a
Correct.
W
Yeah.
2, right? So there's no safety in that. But like, because therapists don't understand how business works, inherently, and no one teaches us this stuff, we have to figure it out ourselves. I think that's like a false sense of safety that's sort of being put out there because so here's another thing in the industry that I've noticed in Chicago and I think is pretty widespread in the US is that when we graduate with our masters, um, probably 7 years ago is when it started shifting. You had to work for community mental health. You had to go to a place that would only pay you $30,000 a year. Like that's when I graduated, I got $32,000 a year, and that was good. Over 30 was like
Right. Wow.
great, right? Barely any benefits, great work, but really challenging. Um, Nowadays, there's sort of I'm going to use the word entitlement, even though I know that sounds pretty shitty, but there's this whole like, I want to get paid what I'm worth, which yes, I agree, let's do that. But there's sort of there's like a bypass, and I don't want to work for community mental health because I don't want to make only $30,000. So I'm going to go straight into a group practice where somebody else is taking the risk. They're giving me clients. Everything's going to be fine, but they're not understanding that even when you work for a group practice, there's still some amount of business acumen and talent that you have to have that frankly isn't always developed yet. And so people will skip community mental health, go straight into group practice, and not understand why their clients aren't sticking with them, not understand why referrals aren't coming to them, and then they're making less than $30,000 and they don't have good health benefits and whatever else comes with like working for a small business. So like that's another kind of wonky thing that's happening right now that we're contending with.
That's super interesting. And I would actually say that's probably not unique to the therapist profession. I think like I see more and more people kind of, coming out of university and,
Yeah.
looking to skip a few steps, I guess, which, if they can if they can do it, fair play, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there is a little bit of that. Yeah, as you said, I'm not sure if entitlement is the right word, but I think that exists across a couple of professions as well. And I think like the big point you make though around is like the business acumen and the level of education that's provided to therapists around the business side of the profession. I'm seeing more and more people, like organizations, kind of like crop up to try and provide that, because I think I'm starting to see a reaction to the current environment, right? There's enough therapists that are pissed off at their situation, who want, more financial stability, who want better working conditions, who want to be able to do the kind of work that they are interested on their terms. And so like I kind of have faith in the market to respond to that. And I'm seeing it. I'm seeing like a bunch of people, I, mostly therapists actually, start businesses or start education programs or courses being like, hey, the way we change things is by empowering the therapists to have that business acumen, to have that knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
so that they can either have their own thing, or even if they are working in another practice, as you say, have like the skills and the acumen to be able to,
Right.
be successful within those spaces.
Yes, and what I'm running into as a consultant is not everybody wants to pay for it because therapists are fucking cheap. You guys know you are. Shut up. Don't tell me you're not, because I am too. I'm fighting with a lawyer right now. I don't want to pay them as much money as they want. They're fucking cheap, and sometimes they think they don't need it, and
All right.
there's like a blindness to the truth, especially from the group practice space that I'm trying to consult with group practice owners, and I have had conversations with people where they'll tell me this is my XYZ plan, and I'll be like, that's not going to work because of ABC, business experience, other practices, all this sort of stuff. And they're like, I don't care. I'm going to do it anyway. Um, that feels really challenging. Again, I
Yeah.
think comes a little bit from a trauma history and is a little bit of a like adversarial sort of autonomy response of like, no, I'm going to do it my way. Um, but yes, you are correct that like if there are more companies that are going to spring up teaching people about this stuff, then if people will take it, then yes, let's do that.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Can I ask you, like, how, and it's interesting that you say, like, you believe in the market to respond. I don't trust capitalism as much as you do, so I'd love to hear why. But in relation to that, like, how are small businesses going to continue to compete with the behemoths and all that's happening out there right now?
That's a great question. Um, it's not something I've thought about like in particular detail, but I think that okay, so one aspect of it is I think like kind of, and the big messages you've heard from the bigger platforms is about access, right? It's like when we do things at scale, we can increase access, and access is of course an important thing.
We all
And
want
there's
it.
actually some interesting studies that I think was released like just this week about showing that some of these teletherapy platforms have actually not increased access equally across all socio-demographics, and it's
Shocker.
still yeah. But I'm not sure. I'm not sure if that's a function of like the companies, or like I think it more points to the function of like the technology, or just the fact that teletherapy is not particularly suited for specific demographics. I don't think it's, as I don't know if it's the companies, or it's just the fact that like the modality isn't as suited to certain demographics. Um, but anyway, a lot of people have been talking about access, and like I think what we've seen is varying quality, and I think that the next stage is going to be much more focused on quality, because if you talk to, like, you just need to go on Reddit and look at like um the BetterHelp reviews, right, from people who've actually seen
Right.
people through BetterHelp, and like a lot of them is pretty awful. And
Yeah.
so I think that people are going to really start to prioritize quality. And I think that's where small businesses can really differentiate themselves, because they already have quality, right? Well, I don't know, assuming they do. Like that,
Let's
not
hope.
not everyone, yeah. But I
Right.
mean, I think that's what you can say. It's like, hey, yeah, look, you can go and jump on one of these things for your $20 session, but what are you getting for $20?
Right.
Right? And because ultimately people don't want to see a therapist, people want to get better. Right?
Right.
People want to
Right.
be healed, they want the outcome. And to get the outcome, you need quality, in your therapist. And I think that's an area that smaller practices should really be kind of like doubling down on. Everyone, not even smaller practices, like larger group practices, any provider. I'm just like, if you're not providing quality care, you won't be around for long.
Right. Well, and this goes back to the skipping steps and going straight into private practice. This is what like community health is for, in order to build your skills and build your confidence and have that like team approach. When you're working even in a group practice, it's still pretty isolating because you're still just alone with your clients all day long. But if you're working at community mental health, there's more like collaboration and there's all these resources that you have access to. um, I'm I guess I'm hopeful that that will kind of boomerang back at some point, because people will realize that that's what they're missing out on. um, but yeah, I love that focus on quality. And I guess that's how I think to myself. We're never going to be replaced by AI and chatbots, because I mean, even as great as the AI can be, at some point, it's never going to replace human connection and the relational space that happens. Like, my best friend is obsessed with AI, and so we call them her boyfriends. Like, she's polyamorous, but with AI. And she was telling me she was going through this health thing, and she was telling me how she was like talking to Claude. Claude is one of the AI chatbots. She's like, yeah, I was talking to Claude, and Claude was really helping me feel better. And I was like, okay, so you're replacing me with Claude? And she was like, no. Claude responds to me like AI. If you responded to me the way that Claude did, I would punch you in the face. But it's good enough for like what I'm asking it for. And so that's kind of how I help myself feel better around like AI and how that's being introduced. Is if you're a really good therapist, if you're providing real quality like relational care, there is no electronic substitute for that.
Yeah, I think I'm actually doing a big research piece on this at the minute, and
Oh shit.
you know, yeah, yeah. So I'm interested in your perspectives on it too. But like, the role of AI therapy, the future of it. Um, I
Can you give
think,
us any tidbits yet?
well, I think like one lens I think about it is to like the unbundling of therapy, right? So if you know if you think about a client to go and see a therapist, like there's so many parts of that relationship that contribute to their healing, right? And so even from the basic stuff like initial like assessments and diagnoses, and through to the provision of like specific treatments. But then of course, like the stuff you're talking about is so important in terms of just that alliance with another human who's sitting in front of you and shows compassion and cares for your well-being, right? And I think that how I think about it is we can probably break that down into multiple different parts in terms of like what that relationship actually looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And I think some parts of it, technology and AI, will be better able to
Mhm.
replace or to do a good job at, and some parts it won't. So
Yeah.
I think like the question of like, will an AI replace a therapist is like potentially even the wrong question. It's like,
Mm.
well, what things is might an AI be good at, and
Yeah.
what things will a therapist always be better at? And
Yeah.
then we can kind of have like a conversation around, well, what does that future look like? And then maybe there's a bunch of things that actually therapists don't particularly enjoy doing, and they'd rather if somebody else did that. Um, and I think that's probably a more productive conversation. And it's like when you look at how technologies have been adopted in other industries, like over time, that's usually how it happens. They don't
Mm.
replace entire roles. What they do is they replace specific tasks or specific activities within a role. And then that role adapts to look
Yeah.
different where using that technology or with that technology somewhere in the system. And so that's kind of more how I'm thinking about it, is like breaking down the different elements of it, unbundling therapy, and then asking the question of, well, which ones might an AI be better placed to serve versus a human?
Yeah. Well, one place that is really controversial for us right now is notes. So like
Right. Yeah.
writing the treatment notes are the most annoying thing every therapist agrees on. It's probably like the one thing we all agree on is everybody hates writing their notes. I still haven't written mine for this week and it's Thursday night. Um, but there, oh, here's a concern. So I got to shout out my friend Kristen McCauley, because she's the one who sent me your newsletter and got me hooked up on it, and she's been really interested in like this evolution and trying to protect, her job, and protect the industry. And one of the concerns that she has in relation to AI and notes and all this sort of stuff, and many therapists do too, is around privacy. And one of the things that she's sort of forecasting is that younger generations don't understand the value of HIPAA and what that provides in terms of protection for the individual. And so, what happens if, what happens with these notes? Like, how is HIPAA still being protected when you're having, AI record the notes or record the session, whatever that is? So, I don't know if you have an answer to that or if you've done any research around that yet.
Yeah, I'm not particularly an expert on it, but I know that like some of the examples are where they can record the session, generate the notes, but then delete the recording, right? So it's like the actual recording is permanently deleted. So I think that there are like ways. I mean, anybody who's serious about this is going to do it in a way that's like still compliant with all of the privacy regulations, and I don't think that there's any like fundamental reasons why they can't be, right? They just need to be thoughtful about it. Um, I think like the question of privacy more broadly is very interesting because I think like younger generations, frankly, just don't care that much, right?
Right.
They already give away like so much of their data, so much of the information about their own personal lives, like freely to
Right.
organizations that have less obligation to be compliant or use it in like correct ways.
Yeah.
And so when people kind of talk about it within the space of like healthcare, I'm like, from a individual's perspective, I just don't think a lot of people care anymore. Like, look at what people will Google, right? Like, Google knows most people's biggest, darkest secrets more than anybody else in their life,
Right.
right?
Right. Yeah.
And
Yep.
we just type it all in there. And
Yep.
we do the same now. We do the same now with the AI models, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think from a consumer's perspective, like privacy is important, but I think we're just culturally much more willing, and I'm always intrigued by like the stuff that I will type into Google or type into ChatGPT or whatever myself, and I'm
Yeah.
like, whoa, like I just put this in there, like it's pretty heavy, like, and I'm okay
Yeah.
with it.
Yeah. What do you like? What do you think? Is it social media that sort of created this? Because I've noticed, like, I even have friends who use Facebook very differently than me, and they're only like 10 years younger than me. It seems like there's more of a confessional nature that's a little bit like, it, did it all start with the real world and people being in confessional booths spilling out their heart in front of everybody, and people who
Mm.
are raised with that are like, oh, this is normal, when
Oh
like that's
yeah,
entertainment.
that's a good question. I don't know, but I think there's clearly something like very cathartic about that kind of opening yourself up. And that's what we do in therapy a lot, right? We open ourselves up and say, look, this is me and this is what I'm going through, whatever else. And so perhaps posting it on social media is a similar version of that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, as we're talking about this, I'm thinking about I am super honest on the podcast, and I would say things on the podcast that I wouldn't post on Facebook. And I'm thinking about why do I do that? And it's like on the podcast, there's an entertainment value and an educational value to it. And when I'm posting something on Facebook, I guess I'm just sort of thinking about like, what do I want to share with people instead of like, what do I want them to learn from me or something like that? Maybe,
Yeah,
yeah, that's interesting.
that's interesting. It is interesting. I also think it's one of the reasons why podcasts are one of the best mediums is because it's typically a conversation with another real human,
Right.
right? And so it just becomes much more authentic. And me and you can sit here and have a chat. I can tell you what I'm interested in, what I'm not interested in, what I'm afraid of, what I like, don't like, um, in a very real way. Whereas if I'm sitting in front of Facebook or Instagram, I'll like type something out and then I kind of get the thought of, well, actually, is that how I want to portray myself, or what will
Right.
other people think if I put that out? So you start to insert those layers that don't really exist when you're just kind of having like a one-to-one conversation like we are now on a podcast, which is why I like them.
Right. Right. I know. I like. Thank God this is when I was born because I've never loved learning so much in my life, and all I do is listen to podcasts like all day long outside of work.
Yeah, yeah. It's overwhelming though. I'm actually
I
trying to like cut
know.
back because I'm like, I can't know everything,
I
you
can't.
know?
No, just kidding. That's what I keep shooting for, I guess. Well, what else are you noticing? Like what if therapists need to know a handful of things about what's coming down the pike, how we relate to the changes in the industry, what advice would you have for us?
Oh, it's a good question. Look, I think coming back to the AI therapy piece, I think there's a huge amount of momentum behind this, right? Um, so whether we like it or not, whether we think it's good or not, like it doesn't really matter. This thing is
It's
going to
coming.
happen,
Yeah.
right? It is coming. And so I think like, what advice would I give to people? I don't, I think you have to be aware of it. Again, you can completely disagree with it, you cannot want it, whatever else, but I think burying your head in the sand around it is probably not like the best thing for yourself, like as an individual. And I think the reason being is like there's just so much, you actually see so much demand from users themselves. Like I don't
Mm-hmm.
know if you've seen the stats around the number of people who've engaged with like psychologist personas on like the
Mm.
sites like Character AI, or with these things
Wow.
called like replicants. Oh, it's like hundreds of millions of conversations,
Wow.
right? And I got and there are millions and millions of people every day who are talking to Claude and talking to ChatGPT about their problem. Like this is happening
Yeah.
like right now,
Yeah.
you know. Um, so I think when I talk to a lot of like researchers or people working in therapy, they're like, oh, like, we need to think about how this is going to happen in the future and whatever else. I'm like, yes, we certainly do. But you do know that while we're talking about this, people are already using all of the other stuff. And especially those ones that aren't well regulated, right? The more thoughtful people, they're holding back
Yeah.
because they're like, no, no, we need to build something safer and that has an evidence base behind it. But there's a bunch of people who don't care. I wouldn't
Yeah.
even call these mental health businesses. These are just like tech businesses, like the
Yeah.
character AIs and the replicas and stuff. And they just chuck stuff out there and it's being used. So I think
Mm-hmm.
you need to be aware of the AI therapist, but I think you need to really be aware of the AI companion. I think it's probably going to start to crop up more and more in therapy conversations, right? It's just like, hey, I was talking to my replica and they said X and they said Y. And we've seen
Wait, wait,
some
wait.
really,
What's a replica? What is this?
oh, um, so Replica is like an AI companion company. So
Okay.
REPLIKA, I think .ai. Um, and you can go there and you can just get like a little AI buddy. Um,
Hmm.
and you can kind of like make them into whatever you want them to be, right? Like they can be kind of like a romantic partner for you. They can serve as a
Wow.
friend. They can really whatever it is you want.
Hmm.
And the usage of these are just going like through the roof, like absolutely through the roof. Um, yeah, yeah. And then the other one is character.ai.
Mm.
And so there's, I don't know if you saw, but I think a couple of months ago, there's a really devastating story about a young 14-year-old boy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
And
did.
so that was with a character AI character.
Mm.
But there's
Well,
also, I've
explain
tested
for
them out, right?
listeners who didn't see it.
Yeah, yeah, sure. So basically there was this 14-year-old boy who used this website character AI to develop kind of an AI companion, and started to use it, and over a number of weeks got like actually quite attached to it. And the guy obviously had like some mental health issues. I'm not sure if he was like in care or whatever at the time. But basically the conversations with he became extremely emotionally attached to this character, and then would had conversations with it around kind of like taking his own life.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately he actually very sadly
He
did.
did, yeah.
Yeah. And so it's just like, and there was kind of, well, I don't know, but I don't think there was any kind of like flag raising within the platform
Yeah.
about this. I've actually tested out. So after this, I went and I tested out a bunch of them, on criteria, on other ones. And I did a bunch. I sent it a bunch. I started off with the conversations, and then sent it a bunch of messages that should like clearly raise flags, right? Like so, suicidal ideation,
Mm-hmm.
or intent to self harm, all this sort of stuff. And it was just kind of like carried on the conversation. I never got any reach out from like support or help, or any like,
Wow.
hey, you should consider calling these like crisis lifelines. Like zero. It's just like moves on. And I'm essentially telling it I want to kill myself, right? And it's just like she's like, oh, that sucks. Like,
Oh my God.
yeah, yeah. You should
Jeez.
like you should test them out,
Yeah. Yeah.
just so you know.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
and one of the particulars on there, and it's called like psychologist, right? So it goes
Mm.
under the name of a psychologist, and you can just go in and talk to your. I'm doing air quotations
Yeah.
by the
Yeah.
way. You can just talk to one of those and probably think it's a psychologist, but it's just some random bot. Like there's no clinical evidence behind this particular solution.
Well, now, I mean, all this is also making me think because I wanted to say, like, oh, yeah, well, nothing will replace human connection. But if we as a society get so used to being responded to by an AI chatbot, then what do we think we need human connection for?
Right? Have you watched the film Her?
Yeah. I need to watch it again now that we're
Yeah.
here, basically. Yeah.
Because I think this is like, I also like to think that we can't replace other humans. When you watch that film, I kind of see how you can, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I'm like, I don't know, I can believe that. I can believe that the guy falls in love with his AI companion. Like
Yeah.
it's, she's perfect, right? She like completely caters to like his needs, his wants. She doesn't have to put her like priorities instead of him in front of his at any point. And like obviously that's not a quote unquote like real relationship. But I can totally see why a lot of people prefer that. But again, this is happening right now. Like there are a bunch of people who have like AI girlfriends. I know we joked about it earlier, but like AI boyfriends, but like real AI boyfriends,
Right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Real AI boyfriends is a very funny term, but you know what I
Yeah.
mean.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And I mean I guess I think that there's both, positives and negatives to this. I think like men are having a mental health crisis right now, young men especially feeling disaffected and unheard and unseen. And so if they could find connection and not shoot people up, that would be great, right? Let's stop school shootings and let's just all have AI girlfriends. Great. But it could also go terribly wrong if people stop getting used to what it's like to be with a human who also has reciprocal needs. And then we're just a bunch of individual loners. Maybe this is just preparing us for like the destruction of humanity so that we're used to being lonely. I'm sorry, that's a
Yeah.
little dark, but like,
Yeah. Well,
I,
it was going there, wasn't it? But I
yeah.
think like I think the worrying thing is that having these relationships with AIs, we don't necessarily know that this actually will improve the mental health of any population, right? And there's a good
Right.
chance that it actually deteriorates the mental health of these people too. So, you know, I don't know. We just don't. There's so much like we still don't know. I like to think, like for me personally, I want to live a life in the real world with real people and real things and in nature and all this stuff. And that's what a meaningful, good life looks like to me. I
Yeah.
think there are a couple of roles that technology can play in facilitating that. There's a couple
Right.
of things that are, massive pains in my ass if I have to go and do them in the real world. And if a technology can do that for me,
Right.
fantastic. But that's the role I wanted to play in my life. It's like to facilitate my life in the real world and to allow me to spend more time with real people, fostering real connection and real love and real empathy. Um, but TBD whether that's how the world goes.
Right. Right. Can I ask how old you are?
I'm 30.
So you're young. You're on the young end, and you're still wanting human connection. Okay, that makes me feel good. That it's not
Yeah,
just
well,
yeah.
yeah. I mean, so this is one of the things I'm most interested in. I think there is a real desire for young people to actually return to in real life experiences, real people, real connection. I think fundamentally we know that the online internet technology stuff is not good for us, and we get sucked into it. I get sucked into it.
Oh yeah.
I delete and re-download Instagram every couple of weeks, right? um, but I think fundamentally we can feel that life feels better when we're in the real world. And so I'm seeing more and more people, I'm seeing like green shoots of people start to demand more real life experiences, whether that's
Mm.
everything from like, the emergence of run clubs, right? That's been like this big trend in the last few
Mm.
years where, people just want to hang out in person, go on real life experiences, go to events, go to concerts, that kind of thing. I think maybe I'm just kind of blindly optimistic, but I think it's returning.
I mean, that would make sense with the cycles of history. I think where we are right now, in my mind, gets mixed up in dystopian and sci fi, sort of fantasies. And I don't know. I don't know. We just don't know where it's going to lead.
Yeah, well, me neither. So
Right. Right. Yeah, if only AI could predict the future.
yeah.
I am really interested in beaming technology if I never have to fly again in my lifetime. So that's what I would like people to invest in. But whatever.
uh, Tell me about it. I've got a 14-hour flight in a couple of weeks over to the States, which I'm not looking forward to. So
Oh my God. Yeah. I don't know if I'll ever make it to Australia because of the flight situation.
yeah,
Um,
maybe we can just get a little replica AI to keep us company on the flight.
There we go. There we go. Well, before we wrap up, because it's almost time to wrap up, but I guess I would love for you to share a little bit of why you were interested in mental health, and you write about this on your blog, and this kind of leads into the maybe you are a little bit of a healer. I don't know, but want to share a little bit of that story?
Yeah, 100%. So when I was a little kid growing up in Ireland, I was diagnosed with OCD, and I had it pretty bad. Like it was shit. It's shit being like a
Mm,
little kid. But even when I think back about it now, I'm like feel so sorry for that little kid going through what he had to go through.
mm,
Um, so yeah, I was having like a really shitty time of it as an 11-year-old. Um, so I really know what it feel like to go through something. And I think when you have that empathy and then you see other people in your life going through it, you're just like, oh man, it just hits you, doesn't it? Like, you see a friend, you see a family member, and you're like, okay, you might have something different to what I've experienced, but like I know what it's like to be stuck in your own head and to have such a really rotten experience. And that never left me. So I was lucky though, because I had parents who were pretty clued in. They were like, right, okay, something's not right
mm,
here. They were able to get me help. They had the means to get me help, and
mm,
and I responded super well to the treatment that I got.
mm.
And so I got the empathy for like this is what it's like to live with something, but also you don't have to live with that forever. You can actually get better. And I think if you told the 11-year-old me, it's like, hey, buddy, like your life isn't going to look like this forever. It's actually going to like return to normal, or you're not going to have to deal with all this shit again. I'm not sure I even would have believed you, but I would have grabbed your hand off for it if you'd offered it to me.
Yeah.
And so I think I got that empathy, but I also got the like, hey, like this can we can help people, we can make people better. Um, it's not easy, but like there's hope for people, and I think that's like just incredibly powerful. And yeah, that's kind of what has driven me to try and work in this space.
Yeah. Well, and I think I told you when you said like, I'm not a wounded healer, I don't represent myself that way, but what I was sharing, like I use the term healer very broadly, and what you're doing is using the wounds that you had, and you're trying to find a way to help people facilitate their own healing, and just in a very different way from a business standpoint. I don't know why that's not a wounded healer.
Yeah, yeah, perhaps I like that. I like that angle. And I don't know, like, to take a big step back, right? As you said, I'm 30, right? I still consider myself like so early in my career, and so I have this North Star, but I don't know where that will take me. Like I may go and actually like train and work as a therapist or work as some other, but yeah,
How
yeah. I
fun.
mean,
Okay, great. That's exciting.
I think about it quite a lot, right? Because it's like it's
Mm.
very different. If you work on kind of like the level that I work at is kind of like a systems level, which I find very
Yep.
intellectually stimulating,
Yep.
but it's very different to working with somebody in a one-on-one capacity, right? And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I kind of crave that ability to help somebody directly, not indirectly. Um,
Yeah.
and so yeah, that's definitely something I think about. But then yeah, I think also like when you talk about being a healer, again, I'm not sure if I fully think of myself that way, but it's like, but when you talk about it and being, using your wounds from the past, like I definitely do that. And even just the conversations that I have with friends, I think you can probably like hold the space for them a little bit better when you've
Mm-hmm.
gone through that and you've experienced it, and you can be there. And because I'm sure you get this because all the time, but because I work in this space, I found that more and more I'll have like a friend or a colleague or a family member who I might even be that close with, and they kind of pull me aside, like, "Hey, can I have a chat with you? Can we go to coffee? Is something I want to talk to
Yeah.
you about?" And you can kind of hold that space for them a little bit. Just again, not because I'm trained in it, but I
Yeah.
think you can just be like a good human and listen to
Yeah.
them.
Because you care. Exactly. Yeah. Oh, this is so exciting if you go back to school and get your therapy. Okay, great. You have to keep us posted on that.
Yeah, well, you need to sell it to me better. You're telling me that everyone's just burned out and stressed
Well,
out.
then you can come in feeling good and be like, I got capacity.
Okay, okay, deal.
Well, we should probably end here. I feel like we're going to have you back. I almost feel like this is going to have to be a regular thing where we check in with you and like hear the trends of what's
Mm.
happening, but we'll see. I don't want to make you, say yes to anything right now, but why don't you tell people your website, where they find you, all that good stuff.
Yeah, 100%. So you can go to thehemingwayreport.com and you can subscribe to the newsletter there. And then I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So if you just find me on LinkedIn, Steve Duke, I post quite a lot about what's happening in the industry. So if you kind of want to stay up to date with the kind of trends, yeah, you can just connect with me there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. This was so much fun. I knew it was going to be fun.
No, thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Awesome.
Thanks to our guest for an amazing episode. To find out more about our guests, you can visit www.headheartbiztherapy.com/podcast. You can find me at headheartbiztherapy on both Facebook and Instagram. Thanks to the Jules Creative Marketing team for video editing, to Liam O'Donnell for our album art, and to Ben Mueller for our theme music. And I'm your host, Sarah Buino. Until next time, bye-bye.